Joe Budden's co-hosts call him out for adding new members to the show. That's right, y'all. On Patreon, Joe Budden's co-hosts aired out their grievances in terms of Joe just adding folks to the show. But the cast was divided. Some people liked the changes, and the people who liked the changes were Parks, Emanny, and the people who didn't was, you guessed it, Flip, Ish, with Ice remaining quiet. This all happened on an episode of the Patreon called The Why is Silent. So I'm going to break down some of the key moments for you to take away from this episode to inform your viewing of the podcast. So, things really pop off when Imani and Flip start going in on each other. Well, not really. They kind of allude to this impending battle that they've been talking about. And Flip is hinting that he has some info on Imani. I think it's just related to something he knows about him and Melissa Ford. Like, I believe Flip thinks that Melissa Ford and Imani are hooking up, quite honestly. And the two engage in a 5-minute standoff of podcast threats. I notice M4 gets up and Flip calls her out for getting up and going to the kitchen, and she says she's going to get some wine. Message. They then start talking about Podsgiving. If you don't remember, Podsgiving was this live stream the pod did last year around Thanksgiving to celebrate the podcast. And they reflect about how chaotic it was and how it was a total mess. And I mean, this whole thing led to a lot of issues for the pod. Specifically, Joe passed gas in front of Ice and his girlfriend's face. That actually led to Ice cursing out the fans. He would go on the next pod and say, "You entitled fans, SMD." And a lot of people think it was because of the fans, but it was actually because fans had noted that and they started making fun of his significant other on the pod. And that's essentially, the Podsgiving is to blame for that. Then Joe questions the pod's ability to go live again because Podsgiving was a fiasco. I don't know if they should go live again. It was a train wreck, but it was really entertaining, so I think they probably should, but we'll see. Then Joe talks about the pod touring, and he hints that he may need to do a pop-up show with the pod. Immediately, Ish suggests that they go to London, and Joe says that the cost to go on tour would be too much. Now, this is fascinating because one of the biggest knocks of the current interpretation of the show is that they can't really go on tour like they did with Rory and Mal. Remember when Joe Budden, Rory, and Mal would go on tour, there would be a lot of people in the audience, I think like 3,000 seat venues. But in the last go around with the last tour, they had to cancel because there was no tickets selling. And Joe did that traditional release thing where, you know, if something goes wrong, they blame it on the planning as opposed to the fan outlook. Like maybe fans didn't just want to see Ish and Ice, and that's why it did not go the way that it was supposed to. Ever since then, Joe has been pretty mum about going on tour again and hints that, you know, it could be too much for the show to do. I think Joe doesn't want to pay them folks because they don't know how to pod on tour. And on top of that, a tour is really chaotic. You know, people can develop conflicts. We saw that the Joe Budden podcast tour developed issues amongst each other because they didn't know how the money was being split on tour. And this even led to issues between Mandy and Bridget. Remember, they fell out on tour as well. Then, later on, Imani reveals that he is no longer with 69 Goddess. And Flip suggests that it is because of something that happened at the pod. Yeah, that's right, guys. He is insinuating that Imani and Melissa Ford have something going on. They are dating. They're hooking up. Flip is just, he's going there, guys. And this might go really bad, especially considering that Flip has been called out for inappropriate behavior towards Melissa Ford. This isn't something I did. This is members of the Twitter community. And I believe that Flip is doubling down on that because if he starts to call out Imani for dating or being with Melissa Ford, then that's also creepy behavior. And I'm not judging, but I'm saying it is creepy behavior because usually in, you know, workplaces or in schools or, you know, those types of settings, often when a guy gets rejected, or at least the optic is that he gets rejected, then they often start dissing the people that actually have a shot at getting with that girl. And that's how the optics look. I'm just saying that's the optics that people are gonna run with. And maybe Flip likes that. Maybe Flip is encouraging that. But just get ready, y'all. Get your narrative guns out there. Get them ready and loaded because we're about to start shooting real soon. Then the gloves come off and Flip calls out Joe for hiring random people like Marc Lamont Hill and requests that Joe alert them when he adds people. And Ish calls Joe crazy. Marc Lamont Hill's addition to the show seems to be ruffling some feathers. A lot of people say, oh, Joe's tricking you. Everybody's tricking you. I tend to think that nobody is really capable of planning narratives to the extent that we would like to think. If something is bothering someone, usually they wear it on their sleeve, right? Ish is mad that people think he's a chauvinist and he likes white women. Imani was mad when people were starting to call him Freaky E, and it even impacted him so much that he navigated away from that because it led to the uncomfortable situation where the guest that he had come on to the show accused Joe Budden of being inappropriate. And Flip was mad at narratives that Joe was planning that undermined his value to the brands he was trying to get to invest in him as a creator. So none of these people are that clever. I'm not saying they're stupid, but it's just by human nature that you're going to mind the narratives that follow you around. And Joe Budden himself, he says that he doesn't care about narratives. That's easy for him to say because he is the one that controls them. He is the one that cuts the checks. He is the one that can put narratives on other people. And if they start to counteract them, he cuts them off or tells them to shut up or that the show isn't entertaining when they do that. So people don't like narratives about them. It's just up to how they control it and how they combat that. After that, Flip asks Joe, when does Marc Lamont Hill start? And Joe says whenever he wants, and that Joe can ask him to come by and he will do it in good faith. That basically means that there's probably no contract set up. And when Joe says come, he'll come by. Joe then reveals that he thinks not everyone is happy that Marc Lamont Hill is joining the podcast. I think that's completely true. Of course, everyone says, nah, they happy. They not happy. I think Ish and Flip hate it. After that, Joe says that the cast needs a professional. Here he's talking about hosts that can make fact-based arguments versus emotional arguments and have the ability to talk about politics. Once again, Ish is quiet throughout this back and forth. Those are direct shots at Ish, right? Ish never really has facts. And you could argue that the people who are unprofessional on the pod are Flip and Ish. But after that, the conversation turns to Melissa Ford discussing how Marc Lamont Hill is a good addition to the pod. Flip then makes another insinuation that Marc Lamont and M4 have hooked up. Flip, you're playing a dangerous game. And it's starting to get to the point where I am agreeing with the fan narrative that Flip is trying to get fired. Why is he playing with this Me Too storyline? A Me Too storyline is very dangerous. It's very dangerous, y'all. Get away from that, Flip. Brands are not going to like that. After that pod topic, it turns to narratives. And the conclusion is that Ish doesn't like narratives and fights against them, which helps them plant narratives against them. It's kind of a paradox. And then Joe says he won't do another Patreon bombing on YouTube because it costs too much and he makes more money by leaving everything on Patreon, and says that instead he will start a new idea where he pays for people's Patreon and hopes they stay subscribed. Now, that is not really a new concept. Remember Netflix, Peacock, Amazon Prime, they always give you like a free month just to get you on the hook. So this is smart marketing by Joe, and let's see how many people fall for it, because that's often the trick. Hey, we'll give you this month free and hope you forget to quit it. He's trying to do his own Netflix thing. He's trying to make it so that you just get used to having the Patreon, but we will see how that goes. Now, there is another moment that I found interesting on this podcast. It's when Joe and the cast start talking about fathers as a result of the Gerard Carmichael show, where he berates his dad, and they start talking about the role of fathers and how if a father's bad, should he pay the consequences for the rest of his life. But anyway, I'm not here to talk about that whole aspect. I'm here to talk about what Jay Wan said about his dad, Jadakiss, and it confirms a theory I've long held about Jay Wan, where I believe Jay Wan is Jadakiss' son. Obviously he is. He looks just like him. I'm not trying to insinuate nothing like that. But I've long suspected that Just because someone is related, just because someone grew up with someone, it doesn't necessarily mean they were the closest to them. Because J1 reveals that his dad was on the road. And it makes sense. His dad was a very successful rapper. Rough Riders, Bad Boy, did songs with Mariah, wrote songs for Biggie. Not many rappers will have a better career than Jadakiss. So that means he couldn't be around him to raise him as much as he would have liked. And it just confirms a lot. So I can see now why he doesn't like the Nepo Baby branding. Because yes, he acts like Jadakiss. He is Jadakiss. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. But there are things he hasn't reconciled with. Things that people don't understand. They just assume because he's related to Jadakiss that the bond is what everyone thinks it is. Like these people, like, oh, he was with me all the time. It wasn't like that. Very similar to the same thing that Joe Budden has said about Trey on the podcast. That Trey has accused him of the same language. You wasn't around. I would have preferred if we had less money, but you was with me when I was a child. Now you see what I'm getting at? Maybe that's why J1's on the pod. Anyway, this episode is called The Why is Silent. It's on Patreon. A lot of people be asking me what episode it is. And just remember, this has to be, sometimes you got to have the $25 tier in order to watch certain episodes. I believe the Monday, I don't know. It's inconsistent. I don't know which tier things drop on. I think it depends on the subject matter. Like if the subject is really hot, then Joe will put it on a different tier. But let me know what you think about this. I really want to end this video by saying the Imani and Melissa Ford narrative is really dangerous, but they look like they're ready to go there, and I can only imagine how this is going to end, because Imani really will smash Melissa Ford. I know y'all not ready for me to say that he will knock that out the park. He is an ish. When I was doing an interview with Imani, I saw the Puerto Rican in him. I'm half Puerto Rican. I know what I'm talking about. I saw it. If Melissa Ford wants it, she will get it. All right, everybody, follow me on Instagram, The Stop TV. Follow me on Twitter, The Stop TV. This is Danny from The Stop. Peace. Hey.